And we're live. Hello, everybody out there. Thank you so very much for joining us here this evening. We have a real special treat ahead. Tonight, we are celebrating the virtual launch of Reg Sherren's That Wasn't the Plan, a memoir. We're broadcasting live from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples. My name is John Taves, exactly as it says below my face. I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here tonight. Again, we have a real treat in store for you. I'm sure you'll all enjoy the offerings this evening. Thank you so much to Douglas and McIntyre for not only publishing the book, but helping to bring this evening together. As we move forward, there'll be a conversation, a few surprises, and then we'll be moving to a Q&A. So I'd encourage everybody participating in this webinar to feel free to just use the little button that's right at the bottom of your screen, ask some questions, and as soon as the Q&A starts, we'll get to you. But tonight, I am going to leave you, returning shortly, and leave you with two much more entertaining personalities who'll be taking you through a whole wealth of stories. Your host for this evening is Janet Stewart, a journalist from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, who hosts CBC Winnipeg News at 6 and 11. Please put your virtual hands together for her.
Yay, John. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us today. This is a real treat for me. It was back probably in March, right before the global pandemic was declared a global pandemic and everything changed, that someone I have admired for years, quite possibly decades, but don't tell him that, he'll get a bigger head, asked me if I'd help him with this book launch. Of course, we thought we'd be in the same room back then. We thought you'd all be in the same room with us too, but this is kind of fun because we get to reach out across the country and across the globe for this. And certainly that's where all the stories that our guest tonight, he's traveled there. He's told stories that have reached all those places. So why not have you reach back out and ask him questions tonight? I'm talking, of course, about Reg Sherren. Reg Sherren is my storytelling hero, really. I just admire him so much. I once asked, when CBC asked me how I would like professional development in the next year, what I would like to do to help with that, I said, please let me job shadow Reg Sherren for a while, because nobody tells a story like Reg does. I admire just everything about the way he does it, from his voice to the way he builds a story and builds in surprises, to mostly the way he treats the people in his stories, because I think he's very, very fair and kind. So Reg, please join us.
Hi there, how are you? You know, I'd like to say right off the top, thanks, John, for coordinating our wardrobe so well. I don't know if the little screen looks like we're wearing the same shirt. I have my trusty Newfoundland mug with my CBC blend tea, so I'm ready to go. And thanks for that wonderful introduction, Janet. Yes, there is a CBC blend tea. It's made by Murchie's on Vancouver Island.
I had no idea. Leave it to you to know that.
I get around.
You do get around, don't you? I'd actually love to start where you did, and that's with the question of origin. I think it matters. I'd like you to start tonight by telling us a little bit about your dad.
Well, you know, my father was my great hero, and he was a gentleman who, we're from Newfoundland, of course. His grandfather, or my grandfather, his father was a United Church minister from Curling in Newfoundland. We grew up in Labrador. My dad had a long and abiding interest in history, and quite a number of the stories over the years that its genesis came from my father's interest in history. So I'm thinking of him tonight, and very, very happy to be with everybody here. It's true, it's a cyber launch. And I was thinking, oh, gee whiz, you know, this COVID, but this has now given us the opportunity to have folks with us from coast to coast to coast. And I know that there are people out there tonight from Newfoundland, maybe from Corner Brook, from Vancouver Island, from all over. So welcome, everybody.
Just grab me my notebook. I'm getting my lovely assistant, Dave, my husband, to hand me my notebook if he can find it. It's down on the ground there underneath there. Thanks. No, actually, I mean the laptop. Thank you. What struck me about it, hearing about your dad, I'm not from Newfoundland. I wish I were. I've often said that. Now, no offense to anybody who's watching from Nova Scotia, because I'm very proud to be a Nova Scotian, but there's something about Newfoundlanders and their, I've always thought that they're kind of, I would argue, the best of us in Atlantic Canada. Just good, down to earth people. And my dad was one of those good, down to earth people. He was from Prince Edward Island, and he used to drag me as a kid to go visiting. We'd stop in, and he would stop and talk to somebody who was his third grade teacher's next door neighbor or something. But Dad kept those connections. And it's only now that I'm a grown up that I admire that. And I wish as a kid, I'd paid more attention to those visits. What is it, do you think, about Atlantic Canadian traditional small town sitting talking to people that made a difference in your life?
Well, I think it's because we had to make our own fun. A lot of people were living in remote communities. They relied on each other for security, for comfort, and for entertainment. And so they became very, very, very good at it. And, when you consider that the island of Newfoundland represents less than 2% of the population of the country, you look at all the comedians and actors and singers that have achieved national prominence from there, we punch way above our weight.
You sure do. You sure do. So how do you think that influenced your ability to tell a story?
Well, I was the middle child. So I had two older brothers and two younger sisters. So I became the artful dodger. I was always trying to get a little bit of attention. And I think I did my first acting job as a 5-year-old playing the chief snowbird in the Christmas pageant. And just about every year, that's what, they would say on my report card, Reg is an attention seeker. And I went, yeah, that's true. Can't argue with that. So I started in radio at the tender age of 15 in Western Labrador, the original 250 watt radio station, CFLW. And from there, I was kind of interested in doing some acting. And then, as it turned out, I wound up playing the role of a broadcaster for the next 4 decades.
The role of a broadcaster.
Here we are today. So I'm hoping people will ask questions about what exactly different stories that I've done over the years, and perhaps I can share a bit more information with them. Oh my, look at this. Janet, what's happened to you?
I've been overtaken by a rather large pug dog. I'll shift him off my lap if I can, just so you can see me. If I have 2 pugs, and if the smaller one were on my lap, you'd still be able to see me. But dude, takes over. We actually received a question already, Reg, from Peggy Hogan. In all your travels, have you learned much about Canadians and their rating in the happiness index?
Well, hi, Peggy. Peggy's down in Gooseberry Cove, not far from where my place is, our place is in Southport, Newfoundland. I think what I've learned is that, generally speaking, particularly in the rural parts of this country, people are pretty darn happy. They're very satisfied with their lot in life. They're hardworking people. They're genuine people. They have a great deal of integrity. And I can't think of one instance when I was ready to leave. I was just having a wonderful time wherever I went, on all the stories of people I met across the country. So I would say the happiness index is probably pushing an 8 or 9 out of 10. Now, that's pre-COVID. I'm sure there are a lot of very frustrated people out there right now who would like to have things a little differently than they've wound up being. You've got your pugs. I have a few things around here as well that I've gathered over the years that I was going to share with folks. For example, this is a piece of ancient oak, and it was given to me by a gentleman by the name of Michael Ibsen. Michael Ibsen was a fine craftsman in northern London who also happened to have a connection to King Richard III. He was the king in the car park that they dug up years ago, and they were going to rebury him. Well, it turned out his mother's mitochondrial DNA provided the link that proved who King Richard was, and he was asked to build the coffin that they reburied King Richard in. And this is a piece of the oak that they used. It was from an ancient oak forest in London, in England rather. So he gave this to me. So it's just a little keepsake I have there. And I'm going to get into a reading now in a moment from the book, but I'll show you one other thing first leading into it. And the story I'm going to read, a part of a story that I'm going to read, deals with chasing after cougars up in the Kananaskis back in 1986. And this is a 70 millimeter shell that I found up on the top of the mountain as we were hunting cougars. Wow. So I'll, if you will, Janet, I'll read this little piece of the story from the book about cougars in the Kananaskis back in 1986.
And so, these are the four-legged kind, right?
That's right, Janet. These are the
probably okay. Trouble for that joke.
I had been talking with a good-natured big game biologist, a fellow named Orville Paul, about a capture program he was running for the provincial wildlife department. He agreed that showing a capture would be a great way to help explain the pressure cougars were under because of urban sprawl. Now, people were concerned about increased sightings, although in reality, we were the ones encroaching on their territory, not the other way around. Orville would capture the big cats and put radio collars on them to assess their movements. But in order to place a radio collar on a cougar, first you had to catch one. No small feat. I wanted to capture it all on camera. That proved to be much more difficult than I thought. First, we tried filming from the air as Orville attempted to pick up a radio collar signal. Camera operator Morris Cruz, a Brit with a dry sense of humor, agreed to go up in the small Cessna. It had no room for me, which turned out to be a good thing. The wind was rough as they dipped and doodled in the hills, pitching the little plane nearly upside down as they tried to pick up the radio signal. It was far too rough for Morris to get a shot. When they landed, he did not look well. He looked great. We moved on to plan B. Cougars are fast, elusive animals. You could spend months in the backcountry and never see one, much less catch one. But where there's a will, there's a way. Orville had hired a group of fellows who called themselves the houndsmen. Their hounds would be released in the area where Orville had seen some scat, a kill, or a bedding place, something to indicate cougar activity, and the hounds would soon pick up the scent. Cougars are also short-winded. Once the hounds flush out a cat, it takes off. It sprints about 1 kilometer before becoming winded, then it climbs a tree. The hounds hold it there until everyone else catches up. It's no trouble finding them because the dogs will not shut up. The howling and barking never stops. No problem, I figured. This time I went with cameraman Mike Hunchak, a big bull of a guy with a great eye for television. We would just follow Orville and the huntsman, and bingo, we'd have our great cougar capture story. Our first attempt to record a big cat was up the side of Wind Mountain, which is where I found this, not far from Mount Lougheed. It was early April 1986. We drove as close to the site as we could, but after that, it was all legwork. We had a heavy Betacam camera, batteries, a tripod, and other gear. We had stripped the kit down as much as we could, but we still had a good 30 kilograms of gear to carry. The hounds picked up the scent down in the valley, and soon the cat was on the run. But it decided to bolt straight up the side of the mountain. Its path was steeper than a 45-degree angle, and within moments, our legs had turned to rubber. By the time we reached the top where the hounds had pinned the big cat, it was too dark to film. Unfortunately, we had left the camera light with its heavy battery belt behind. It was a magnificent male, easily 8 kilos, and we didn't have a shot. My first attempt at becoming Canada's Marlon Perkins was a dismal failure. Now, if you don't know who Marlon is, Google. A week later, we tried again. Spring was starting in the Kananaskis with green growth sprouting forth, but the night before it had snowed a lot. That morning, a good 15 centimeters of wet, fluffy mush was lying atop slippery new growth as we picked our way along the narrow mountain trails with drop-offs of 100 meters or more to the valley below. Fearless Mike, who once again had gotten the short straw to go with me, didn't flinch. He even got an incredible shot of a bald eagle screaming down at some bighorn sheep far below. We carried on. Soon, the hounds were on the scent and had a cat trapped far up a pine tree. Orville waited until we arrived and prepared to tranquilize the animal. He was using a new drug that basically immobilized the cat, but left it partially awake with eyes open. The cougar we trapped was quite young. Mike got great shots of the dart going in, the cougar being lowered to the ground, and Orville working out measurements and putting the radio collar on. I knew these were pictures that few had seen before, certainly not on the nightly news. Our story would be from a much different perspective than news stories about people having their dogs taken by cougars or cougars challenging people on walking trails. To protect the cat, Orville and his team planned to wait until it had fully regained its senses. Mike and I had to hike out on our own. Just follow the creek bed down to the road, Orville said. Easy enough. A kilometer down the hill, we came upon a tree where a grizzly had marked its territory. Huge, fresh claw marks, 3 or 4 meters up, scarred the side of the tree. Deep, angry claw marks. We were not long in getting the heck out of there and back to the relative safety of the van. I had never seen a grizzly in the wild at that point, and I really didn't want to see one that day. It all led to my first feature on a network newscast, Saturday Report, hosted by George McLean. The half-hour news show had given me almost 4 minutes of airtime to show Orville and the cougar to viewers across Canada. George smiled after the piece. I beamed. 2 months later, Orville was dead. That's a cliffhanger.
It really is a cliffhanger.
It's in the book.
I have had the great pleasure of reading that book. We've got some questions coming in, and folks, I see John is asking you, reminding you, just hit the Q&A button if you do have questions you'd like to send us. Let us know where you're watching from too. That would be great. Your sister's watching. Hello, sis.
Which one?
Christine.
Oh,
do you have a
Christine.
Christine?
Hi, Christine.
There's another Christine watching, Christine Gurniak. Fabulous video editor.
What a tremendous editor. She's in the book. So we have a question?
Yes, well, Christine is wondering, and actually so are Craig and Cheryl. We'll go with Craig and Cheryl first because their question came in first, but it's pretty much the same as Christine's. What is your most memorable interview and why? And in just a minute, I'll give you Christine's got a slight variation to that. She wanted to know most memorable story.
Well, favorite. It's really hard to nail it down to one particular interview or story. There have been so many. Certainly spending time with John Ford and hearing him explain how, as a young man, he decided to serve for his country out of England, was captured in Singapore by the Japanese and became a prisoner of war in a little place called Nagasaki, where he was working as a slave laborer in the Mitsubishi dockyards and was systematically beaten and starved for about 3 years until one day he looked up to witness what he thought was the end of the world. Talking to John and realizing that he had an encyclopedic memory, and right down to the time of day when he first went into Nagasaki, he remembered everything. I don't think I'll ever forget that. And we became good friends right up until the day he died. He was 82 years old when I had the great honor to take him over to Japan, and he lived for another 10 years after that. When he was released from the prison camp, they told him he wouldn't live to see 25. So that has to rank up there, absolutely. Any of the stories that I managed to tell and the interviews that I told or shared with people that had served their country, those probably are at the top for me.
How did you ever select stories for the book? What was your process?
Well, the stories for the book, I was helped along a great deal by people with fresh eyes, like my wife, Pam, for example, who would say, no, not that, this, not that. You can't put that in there until those people are dead. No, I'm so just kidding. But, people that had a better editorial eye than me. I mean, it was a very cathartic exercise when I started to write the book. The book was actually probably a little over twice the length that it is now, at about 350 pages when I started out. So, little by little, with the help of editors and so on, you realize, okay, these are the areas that perhaps you want to focus in and the stories that you want to tell. Maybe there's another couple of books there yet, who knows?
I was so impressed by just your simple memory. People ask me what was the lead story in the newscast last night, and I might not remember. The fact that you were able to recall, did you just sit down and go, what do I remember?
Well, I'd like to say that I have an encyclopedic memory, but that would be a lie. I don't know what day it is most of the time. But I have a huge, and actually I meant to bring it down, but I have a huge binder full of synopsises, chronological synopsises of the over 5,000 stories that I produced in my career. And that was just invaluable in helping me to dodge my memory, look back at things that happened. And of course, for the bigger stories, you don't just report those stories, you live those stories. And so I remember them all vividly.
You mentioned that our CBC colleague, Christine Gurniak, is in your book.
Yes.
There are a lot of great camera people that you give a nod to. How important is teamwork, do you think, in building good TV?
Well, I've often said to people in the world of television, if you don't have a reporter and you have a good camera, you can still tell the story. You're not the most important person in the room, really. The camera person is. Now, there are times when, they have ideas, you have ideas, everybody's giving direction, and you try to work like a cohesive unit. I very rarely, I worked with some fabulous producers over the years, but a lot of the time I was self-producing as well, because it was more cost effective in a lot of cases, and in other times we just didn't have the resources to do it. So that helped to hone my skill levels as well. But there's no doubt that it takes good, solid teamwork. And then, of course, when you get into an edit suite with a talent like a Christine Gurniak or a Jill Tetreault, you wind up with magic. And of course, Warren Kay, who was my wingman for probably better part of the last 10 years of my career, was also the editor. And he was just remains a fabulous fellow. Hi, Warren, I hope you're watching.
He better be. Warren is just a lovely guy. We've got a question here from Gail, wondering, apparently you've talked to Gail in the past about the Titanic story. Gail's wondering, how big a fan of the Titanic story are you?
Well, I got to learn an awful lot about it at the 100th anniversary. I think we wound up doing 4 pieces and meeting people whose relatives had been lost to the Titanic and people whose relatives had survived the Titanic, but then wound up sinking themselves as a direct result of being accused of all sorts of things. So, it's one of those abiding tragedies where, you have an unsinkable ship and you have some of the wealthiest people in the world, some of the poorest people in the world, all heading to the new world, and the way that unfolded in the middle of the North Atlantic, it remains a compelling and abiding story. So yeah, absolutely, it's a big one. Now, there are other stories as well that to me speak of naval tragedy, if you will. One of them being the torpedoing of the SS Caribou. A lot of people don't know it, but the Caribou was the ferry that ran between North Sydney and the country of Newfoundland at the time. And it was torpedoed by a German U-boat and actually led to the largest marine disaster in Canadian waters during the Second World War. Over 200 people lost their lives. And that is another, so anytime you have a story that involves, the wartime in that particular case, or a tragedy at sea, those are moving, touching stories for sure.
Craig and Cheryl had a number of questions for us, and one of them was, the book is called That Wasn't the Plan. They were curious, what was the plan?
There wasn't a plan. I was kind of making it up as I went along. As I said earlier, I started in radio when I was about 15 years old, and I'd been working in the mine at that time and actually working in construction first, then in the mine. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. I was thinking maybe I'd like to get in and do some acting. I was doing community acting with some very talented people, and had a great interest in that. And then I had heard that they were opening a brand new radio and television program in a place called North Bay, Ontario, Canadore College. And so I applied to go there. Now, because I was from outside the province and I was applying as a mature student at that time, I had to do aptitude tests and put, round pegs and round holes. And I guess they wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. And I went there, and it was a perfect fit for me because I'd already been in radio. They had a radio station that operated on cable, and they also did a nightly television newscast. So that's how that evolved. But there wasn't really ever any plan. I was down in Toronto and working for a national advertising company, and that I wasn't liking that at all. And I went back to North Bay, and I heard they were looking for a television news anchor. And I was 22 years old. And I said, okay, I'll go back into the college. And I wrote up a newscast and set up an ENG camera and read it off and edited it together. And the rest is history. That's how I've been doing it ever since.
So just trial by fire, just
Pretty
go
much.
in and do it. Learn in the doing of it.
Yes, absolutely.
We've got a lot of questions coming in. Someone says, oh, anonymous attendee. Do we take questions from anonymous attendees?
It depends on what the question is, Janet. I'll get you to filter that out, please.
Well, one of my favorites, you covered a lot of big stories. One of my favorites was more of an enterprise project. If I remember correctly, people in Newfoundland and Labrador had won a lot of big lottery jackpots, with one exception. Those wins led to more heartache and woe than you might expect.
Wow, that's interesting that somebody remembers that story. Yes, I pitched the whole idea of going and following simple folks who won a lot of money, and I managed to find 4 or 5 of them. And as the individual says, they were all pretty much miserable, except for one couple that I found, and they had moved literally into the middle of the bush. The only way you could get to them was to drive up the old railway bed, and people still did, to try and find them and ask them for money. But they seemed to be the most even-keeled of the group that I found. People became afraid that their kids were going to be kidnapped, that people were constantly harassing them for money. They had quit their jobs, and they actually liked their jobs. So their sense of purpose, if you will, had gone by the wayside. Those are the stories I think that people find very interesting, because we all go, oh, wouldn't it be great to win $1 million? Well, here's what winning $1 million looks like.
How do you advise young journalists on how to find stories? What would you tell them?
Well, I guess the first thing is shut up and listen, because you can find all kinds of stories by just doing that. I used to read 25 community newspapers a week, probably, back when we had that many community newspapers. That's another, and then of course you became surfing on the internet. But I'll give you an example. I was looking at a community newspaper one time, and I saw they were having this reunion in Olha, which was just south of Riding Mountain National Park, and there were people coming from all over North America. So they had a little calendar of events, and they're going to have a pie contest on this day and bread baking, and then on Sunday it said Memorial at Mass Grave. And I went, Memorial at Mass Grave? What is that all about? So I called the local minister, and he explained to me that these people were Galician Ukrainians who had come over to Homestead, and on the way, quite a number of them contracted scarlet fever. And by the time they got to Olha, the first thing they had to do was bury 30 or 40 young children that had died, and dozens of adults as well. And now the survivors, the people that went on to create the community there, and their descendants were coming from across North America to remember them. So I guess part of it is, shaking the bushes, looking, trying to find the answers that are between the lines, if you will, or in this case, on a little tiny calendar of events. And your spider senses, you can, as over time, I learned how to find a good story.
James and Elizabeth Hare ask, have you ever felt that you're getting too immersed in a story and need to distance yourself as a journalist to maintain objectivity? Absolutely.
That's I like to tell people that you have to give a little piece of yourself to a story, I think, to really have an impact with folks. And I didn't do a lot of stories where you were doing political accountability and that sort of thing. It wasn't my thing. But when I did have to do it, I made it quite clear, if I was coming after somebody and looking for accountability, that I was going to be coming after them. And I knew where the line was, and I was always very cognizant of it. it's not an easy thing because, of course, you want to create a rapport and get stuff out of people, but then you also do have to maintain that distance. And your integrity as a journalist, if you don't have that, then you don't have much. I think there's a story in the book about where one of my employers wanted to do a news break that was going to be sponsored by a beer company, and I asked my employers. I said, well, if that beer company, put out some beer that was making people sick in the marketplace, would that appear on the news break? And they kind of hemmed and hawed, and I said, I'm not doing it. I won't do it. I'll quit first. And I was still a young reporter at that time, but I knew enough to know that you do have to maintain that objectivity and that separation. And so they changed it to the sports break instead. So it got resolved, but I mean, it can get to the point of ridiculousness where there was a television station down in Duluth, Minnesota, where they had called it the Piggly Wiggly News Hour, and the Piggly Wiggly was a convenience store, and they even had the Piggly Wiggly pig on the front of the news desk. I mean, you just couldn't believe anything that came out of their mouths. I guess we should be moving along. How are we doing for time?
Well, we're eating it up quite well. One of our questions was, what was your most memorable destination? And I think that might lead us to your next bit of story you want to read from the book.
Yes, well,
perhaps.
Actually, you know what? Here, look, this piece of rock here, this is from Grise Fjord on Ellesmere Island, 1,600 kilometers from the North Pole. That was a place to go. And there was a gentleman up there named Luti Piomini, a carver, who would make beautiful things like this out of the stone that he carved and found around there. And the base of this is actually a piece of petrified wood from the west side of Ellesmere Island. So that was one place, but certainly the Persian Gulf would have to rank up there. I mean, our son was just 3 months old when, I'm sure my wife thought I was nuts, I pitched going to the Persian Gulf, the first Persian Gulf War. And this is actually one of the signs that I took from the hotel when I was staying there. It was about 40 or 45 degrees Celsius in the day, 100% humidity. The pool, like I ever got to go in it, was actually cooled by water in the Ramada Inn in Bahrain. But we were on the warships off the coast, and this was before the war actually started, and there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going on. So I'll read you this little excerpt. I am not a good sea person. This was not a seagoing vessel. It was designed to move people around the harbor, not for sailing a couple of kilometers offshore. The Persian Gulf can get rough. We learned that soon enough. Like an ant moving through tall grass, we moved precariously through the fleet of warships tied up everywhere in the harbor. On board, there was just myself and Mark, the cameraman, and 2 crew. The captain rarely spoke. His assistant, who was from India, spoke English very well. During the ride out, he told me he worked on the boat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He slept on the small wooden bench in the cabin. He had 1 pair of flip-flops, 2 pairs of pants, and 2 shirts. He cooked and ate on the boat with just a couple of pots and pans. Twice a year, they flew him back to India for a week to see his wife and 6 children. The rest of his life, he was on this boat. He seemed resigned to it all. These 2 gentlemen and their bobbing cork would become our only means of getting to and from the HMCS Protector. Every trip would be an adventure, and today it was rough. Once we cleared the harbor, the swells kept getting bigger and bigger. The floating dock that was attached to the Protector, at the time the Navy's largest service and fuel resupply vessel, with a large flight hangar housing the Sikorsky Sea King helicopter on its stern, was moving up and down. As we approached in the swells, I could see getting on that dock was going to be more than a challenge. It would mean risking our lives. At one point, the dock was a good 3 meters above our heads, then below us, then above. We had to time it perfectly to transfer the gear and then ourselves during the brief moment when both our boat and the dock were level. 1 slip step and you could lose your leg, or worse. Slowly, we timed each transfer, then counted all our fingers and toes. On board, the crew was excited for our arrival. like a little piece of home. The boys from Newfoundland CBC's Here and Now had come all the way to the Persian Gulf to see them. They were a great bunch, eager for news from home, and whenever we were on board, they couldn't do enough for us. The plan was to lift off the back of the Protector and fly out to the Athabascan, which was patrolling off the coast of Kuwait. We would land on the back of it and shoot them on patrol, perhaps even videotape a practice attack drill. No sweat. Well, as it turned out, a lot of sweat. It was hot enough on deck in the chopper where we wore flight suits, helmets, and water flotation gear. It was a stifling just shy of 50 degrees Celsius. The Sea King was well maintained, but old. We did a little rehearsal drill about ditching in the water. I did not want that to happen. Earlier, looking over the side of the ship, I'd seen massive sea snakes, lots of them, swimming just under the surface. When we lifted off, there was a big swell, but nothing too serious. By the time the HMC Athabascan came into sight, however, it had become extremely rough. It was so rough, the Sea King couldn't get onto the deck without help. Our crew dropped a grapple cable with a claw on the end. Below us, the deck crew attached it to a large steel ball on the stern, and we were literally winched down to the surface of that ship, hitting it with a not insignificant thud. And there we were on a Canadian warship 100 kilometers off the coast of Kuwait. My adrenaline was pumping and we were eager to get started, but there was a problem. The water was now so rough, we could barely stand up. We attempted to do an interview, but it proved impossible. And I was starting to feel queasy. Everybody was. It was decided as it was getting late that we should bunk down for the night. We followed a crew member down a steep set of stairs, then to the back. Again, down and to the back, then again. I thought, if this keeps up, we'll be underneath this damn ship. Finally, he pointed to a row of bunks and said I was up on top. I rolled into the bunk, lying on my back with just a few centimeters between the tip of my nose and a huge steam pipe. A curtain hung on my right. A voice on the other side said, "How's it going?" After I said hello, the voice continued, "Hey man, I'm from the operations room. I don't want to scare you or nothing, but there are twice as many Iraqi planes in the air today as yesterday, and we don't know where they're coming from." For the first time on this surreal trip, I thought, okay, now you've really got yourself in the middle of something serious. It was a scary thought, one the crew was no doubt having every day.
Wow. As you were reading that, I thought of Nola's question. Nola is in Golden, BC. Hi, Nola. Thanks so
Hi,
much.
Nola.
She wants to know, what was your scariest story you did personally?
I had a couple of, and they weren't big stories like that story, but there was a time when we were down at a place called Witless Bay, and there was nothing funny about it. There was a bit of a dispute going on at the crab plant there, and the boys had gotten quite irate, and they'd flipped over a few vehicles, and they were threatening to burn down the crab plant. And we got down there with the camera, and right in the thick of it, maybe too much in the thick of it, when one of them said, "Geez, boys, CBC got pictures of all of us. We should throw them in the harbor." And I looked over at the harbor, and there was oil slick there, diesel fuel, and crab guts and shells. And I thought, oh boy, this is it. We're done for. So thinking that perhaps offense would be the best defense in this situation, I jumped in his face and I said, "You son of a, you invite us to come down here and represent your point of view, and that's the way you're going to treat us? Screw you." And then the other guy said, "Oh, it's okay, leave him alone." And I said, Lloyd, who was the camera guy, said, "Lloyd, come on, let's get out of here." And we ran up on the bank just in time for the RCMP to show up with a megaphone and go, "All right, G crowd, CBC's got pictures of you and you'll all be charged." And I had to jump up on the bumper of this police cruiser and say, "We don't work for the RCMP. If they want our tape, they're going to have to come. Lloyd, get the van. They're going to have to come for it." And we jumped in the van and got out of there. That was a valuable lesson. Never let a large, angry mob get between you and safety.
And you also don't want a large, angry mob or anyone thinking that if they talk to you, you're going to hand the tape over to police. So
well,
you had to fight
absolutely.
that
Well,
one.
that's that degree of separation again. Exactly. Who do you work for? Absolutely. Very true.
Yeah. Cindy Curry saying, which are the stories that have stayed with you and had the biggest impact?
Well, there's so many of them.
They're in the book.
Yes, and a lot of them, these people became personal friends of mine, and I stayed in contact with them long after. Certainly Carling Muir would have to be, one of the last stories I did was about a young woman that I think the entire country fell in love with, who was battling brain cancer. And she was just such a sweetheart, and so much courage, and so open and so welcoming, that that story stays with me. In fact, I just talked to her mom 2 days ago to see how she was doing. And, she's still in there with the battle. Things are up and down, probably more down than up, I'm afraid to say. But she's a fighter, and she's hanging in there for now. So stories like that. Young Earl Cook, who himself battled so many challenges in his young life, and yet had this spark of a personality that would light up a room. All of those people, they all took a little piece of me. Even I was saying to someone the other day about the flood of the century. Here it is, was 1997, so that's like 23 years ago, and I'm pretty sure I'm still retaining water. But there was a young gentleman named Adam Young who lost his life during that flood. And I didn't realize what kind of an impact that all had on me until I did an interview many months later when they were doing the big stories of 97. And I became so emotional, I couldn't talk about it. And it was only then that I realized what kind of an impact stuff like that can have on you. So yeah, you have to be very careful about trying to create some separation, but you also have to let it have a piece of you if you really want to do it well.
Donna was asking, Donna Lee, who works at CBC with us, lovely young woman. She's worked up north.
She sure did.
You've mentioned Canada's north.
Yes.
It's a place that you are very fond of.
I'm a huge fan of it.
She's wondering what your most memorable experience there is.
Well, certainly Grise Fjord has to rank up there. We traveled down the ice road from Inuvik to Tuktoyaktuk with a young fellow that was trying to set a world record, and did, driving a solar car down there and going across, driving on the ocean on an ice road. That was quite an experience. That has to rank up there. Also going up the Dempster Highway, and there was a big fire going on the Dempster when we were there, and we got down. This guy said, "Hey, come on, I'll drive you down to the fire." So we had this pickup truck, and we all piled in, and we got down, and geez, the flames were leaping 40 feet in the air. And at that point I recognized that there was a 45-gallon drum of diesel in the back of his truck. And he said, "Isn't this something?" I said, "Yeah, it's really great, but can we get that out of here like now?" Because trucks were coming back to the stop after we got back up, and the paint on the sides of the trucks had bubbled up from the intense heat. So it was that was quite a trip. But pardon me, crossing the river up there with the porcupine caribou herd, and being in a boat and listening to the rhythm of those animals as they breathed and swam in the water, very similar to the throat singing that you hear up in the high Arctic. It was a magical thing. I'll never forget that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Eric is wondering what the weirdest thing to happen in your travels was.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think there was anything too weird. It was kind of weird going down to Colorado after they had legalized pot, because of course there's a big debate going on up here, and you go down to a place like Denver and they've got artwork like these huge blue panda bears looking in through windows, and you're thinking, Jesus, everybody on pot down here? But anyway, this is quite unique. This is actually a receipt from the Denver Relief Recreational for the purchase of a joint of marijuana. So it was 1 year after, and before it was legalized here, it was the first time I'd ever seen a receipt for marijuana. So that was kind of weird. Other than that, I don't think there were too many far out things.
The time you ended up on the back of a whale, that doesn't, yeah.
Well, wasn't weird. It was just scary. I mean, I set myself up for that one, but that was with a gentleman named John Lean, who was doing his best to protect humpback whales that were getting caught in fishermen's gear and doing thousands and thousands of dollars in damage. So we went down with him one morning to as he attempted to release a whale, and we wound up in a small Zodiac boat, and John would throw a grapple hook over the side and grab some of the rope trailing behind this whale and start pulling on it and pulling on it and pulling on it. Next thing you know, we're practically on the back of this whale with these huge fins coming swinging by. And then he says, well, hold on to my belt. And he goes down over the side and he cut the line as close to the mouth of the whale as he possibly could and released it. And then as we're hauling all this gear back in, suddenly these two monster crab claws come over the side, not crab claws, lobster claws come over the side. They were the size of footballs and then arms on them almost as big as my arms. And I'm thinking, here's this poor lobster down on the bottom telling his buddies, geez, here I was minding my own business, caught in this net, and this whale came along and ripped my arms off. So yeah, that was a little bit of a weird story.
A little bit strange. We have a couple of questions. One's from David Kyle regarding music and the relationship between storytelling and making music in your life.
Well, geez, I don't know if that's a segue or not, David, but thank you. Yes, absolutely. In fact, I was going to do a little song for you guys. I don't know if we still have time to do it or not, but
well, we're running over, Reg, but I think you should do your song because I think it's fun.
Okay,
we have 9 minutes till we have to absolutely wrap up.
Okay. Well, about 30 years ago, I met a polar bear that I named Bingo. And Bingo, a lot of people don't know it, but polar bears do wind up on the island of Newfoundland. They come down on the ice in the spring and they're chasing seals. So sometimes when the ice gets locked up on the shore, they step off and cause a lot of havoc. So this is a story about Bingo the bear. He came floating down from around somewhere up near the Arctic Circle. Oh, Bingo bear, the polar bear, watched it all float by. The torn gats and name, wriggle in a cart ride too. But what's a bear to do? He had a powerful hunger that roared like thunder deep down in the belly of that big white sinner. So it was seal for breakfast, yeah, seal for lunch, and you can bet it was seal for dinner. He was a Bingo bear of the Bay Rock Lounge. He was gnarly and grumbly and always hungry. It was a bad combination at best. Well, that ice was a-moving and that big bad bear was a-grooving. He found himself floating on down by the rock, Newfoundland. Now there was something in the air down around there, something fishy and fatty. But more than that, he just needed a break from seals. So old Bingo Bear, he hatched a plan. He decided to step off and take to the land. Yeah, that great big old bear, he just didn't care. He just let his nose guide the way. He was a Bingo bear of the Bay Rock Lounge. He was gnarly and grumbly and always hungry. It was a bad combination at best. Now the girls had gathered for bingo and gossip over at that very same Bay Rock Lounge. And between Bingo and Gavin and Doblin, those girls managed to work up quite a hunger themselves. So under the G.S. and great big feed, they cooked up a great load of fish and chips, of course, complete with dressing and gravy. Well, the smell pretty near drove old Bingo crazy. As he circled the lounge, his nose let him down. There was just no way to get in. And then when the girls spotted him, well, that's when his troubles really began. They got on the phone to the law. They screamed out in fear, this great big white bear has got us all held hostage. He was the bingo bear, the big rock lounge. He was gnarly and grumbly and always hungry. It was a bad combination at best. Well, the boys quickly arrived with what can only be described as a tube-like device with which to entrap old Bingo. But here's the thing though, they said, what can we do? What can we use? What do we have for bait? Well, quick as a wink, the girls had to think, and they forked over some fish and chips and put that in the trap, and in 10 minutes flat, no fail, old Bingo was jailed. He was a bingo bear, the Bay Rock Lounge. He was gnarly and grumbly and always hungry. It was a bad combination at best. So that's old Bingo's story. Well, not quite. The next day he found himself floating again, but not on the ice. Nope, he was in a great big net underneath an even bigger helicopter. And the trip was for free, but it came with advice. Stick with seals for your meals, give up your bingo delights, and from now on you'll just have to catch your own fish and forget about the chips. He was the bingo bear, the Bay Rock Lounge. He was gnarly and grumbly and always hungry. It was a bad combination at best. See ya, Bingo. True story.
True story. They're all true stories. How many stories are in your book? Kim was asking.
Whew, hundreds.
Yeah.
Hundreds. I couldn't give you any better description than that. There's definitely hundreds. Like I said, over my career, I told probably over 5,000. Definitely over 5,000.
Alice and Mark from Ottawa were wondering if there might be a second book, and I'm thinking there might be. There just might be.
Well, we'll see how this one goes. It was a lot of fun, you know, and it was a great honor to tell the stories of all these lovely people from across Canada. And, you know, it occurs to me in a moment of selling that here's a great opportunity in this book to take a trip across Canada without leaving your armchair and learn a little bit of history along the way.
Quite a lot of history, really. Someone else was wondering, Mary Lou, if you were Mary Lou McGregor, actually.
Oh, hi, Mary Lou.
Are you still married to the same beautiful woman? I put the word beautiful in because she is pictured in the book. Yes,
absolutely. I couldn't have done it without her. What a wonderful gal. And like I said before, my most important editor, my fiercest ally, and my best friend.
You're a lucky man, Reg Sherren.
I am indeed.
Great career, gorgeous book, gorgeous family. Thanks for letting me be part of this evening.
Janet, thank you. And I'm hoping your sidekick Dave is handy there, because I gave him a couple of little things just to say thank you to you. And for everything that you did.
Mike, what have you done? Thank you, Reg. You didn't have to do that.
Well, sure I did. Sure I did. So I guess we're near the end of this all. Thank you, people. Lovely to see you all. Enjoy. And thanks again, Janet, very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Reg. Keep up
I'd also like to thank McNally Robinsons for this lovely event, and John for all his kind assistance.
Bruce Ernst just said something. Is he Hank's son?
He is Hank's son. Hank Ernst was a member of the Canadian Guinea Pigs. That's a fabulous story. Read about it. You won't regret it.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Your dad sounded like a great guy. Thanks, everyone, for watching. John?
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you all so very much. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Reg. Thank you to Janet's able canine co-host. And thank you all for your questions too. There were so many questions, so much conversation that rest assured, if your question was not answered or if your comment wasn't mentioned, I'll be sure to get those off to Reg so he can see everything that you folks sent along. Now, if you are interested in reading some of the stories that Reg was talking about, you can find signed copies of Reg Sherren's book at McNally Robinson Booksellers. You can give us a call. You can order the books online. You could just get in touch with us and we'll make sure to send one along to you. This video will also be archived on our YouTube channel, and I'll be posting a link to that via Twitter in just a second too. It's also available on our website. So the link is available on our website. So if you missed it, or if you want to pass the stories along to somebody else so they can listen, please do. I'd like to thank all of you again for joining us here tonight. It's lovely to have you here, even if we can't celebrate in person. It's great to gather in this way. I'd also like to thank our incredibly capable host, Janet Stewart, for coming on board and doing such a wonderful job. And of course, Reg Sherren. Thank you all very much, and